Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive. Are you ready to get your minds blown? Because today we're talking about power
Power.
versus force.
Yeah.
And we are diving deep into this book by David R. Hawkins.
Power versus force, the hidden determinants of human behavior.
Such a long title, right?
Yeah.
But it's so fascinating, and I'm so excited to dive into it and to really break it down
Me too.
for you all, because this is a really complex topic. And I think it can be really easy to get lost in the weeds
Absolutely.
and all the jargon.
Yeah.
But we're going to try to make it as simple and easy to understand as possible.
We are going to distill it down.
Yes, we are. So what really stood out to you when you first read this book? What blew your mind?
Well, I have to say that the whole concept of measuring consciousness blew me away.
Okay, so that was my question. Like right off the bat, when I saw kinesiological testing, I was like, is this like a maniac trick?
Right.
You know what's going on here, but explain it. Because
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah. So basically, kinesiological testing, it's a way to measure the energy of different thoughts and emotions and how it impacts your physical strength.
Okay.
So for example, when you hold a thought like forgiveness, your muscles will actually test strong.
Oh.
But if you're holding a thought like revenge or anger, you'll actually weaken.
So it's like the energy of the thought is actually affecting your
Physical body.
physical body.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty wild.
Mm.
And he goes on to talk about this thing called the map of consciousness, right?
Yeah, the map of consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's basically the scale that goes from 20 to 1,000. And it kind of maps out all these different levels of consciousness.
Can you walk us through that a little bit? Because I was looking at your notes and you had like a rainbow of colors
I did.
highlighting all these different levels. So let's start at the bottom. Like, what are some of those lower levels of consciousness?
So like the very bottom down at like 20, you've got shame, guilt.
Yeah.
Kind of like that feeling of worthlessness and despair. Not fun at all. And then you move up a little bit.
Right.
You got fear at 100, desire at 125, anger at 150. And these are all kind of like those lower vibrational emotions, where you're just kind of reacting to the world from a place of lack and limitation.
It's almost like those are the emotions that we kind of try to avoid feeling.
Right, exactly.
But he's saying like those are actually driving a lot of our behavior.
They're underlying a lot of our actions and our thoughts. And it's not until we become aware of them that we can start to shift them.
So where do things start to shift? Like where do we move into those more positive emotions on the map?
Yeah, so around 200, you hit courage.
Okay.
And that's kind of like the turning point where you start to move from that negative energy to a more positive energy. And then at 250, you've got neutrality, which is all about letting go of judgment and seeing things from a more balanced perspective. And then as you keep moving up, you hit willingness at 310, acceptance at 350, reason at 400.
I love that reason is in there.
Yeah, because it's about, starting to use your mind and your intellect to make decisions.
To problem solve.
Yeah, exactly. And then at 500, we hit love.
Okay, wait, hold up. Love is that high on the scale?
Yeah.
I always thought of love as like this fluffy,
Yeah.
emotion.
Right, like a Hallmark card.
Yeah, exactly. Not this like powerful force in the universe.
But Hawkins is talking about unconditional love, like the kind of love that's not attached to any outcome or any expectation.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then above that, you've got joy at 540 and peace at 600. And then at the very top, from 700 to 1,000, you've got enlightenment, which is like that state of pure bliss and oneness.
Okay, those top levels sound pretty amazing.
You do.
But also a little bit hard to grasp. Like, how do we actually experience that in our everyday lives?
Right. And that's a great question. And I think that's something we can explore as we continue to dive deeper into the book.
Yes.
Because Hawkins gives us so many practical examples of how this power versus force dynamic plays out in different areas of our lives.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so exciting about this book, is that it's not just some theoretical concept. Like, it actually gives us tools and techniques that we can use to shift our own level of consciousness and to create a more powerful and fulfilling life.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned, because we are just getting started.
Yes, we are. So, we were just talking about those higher levels of consciousness, like love and joy and peace. And I think a lot of people might be wondering, like, okay, that sounds great, but how does that actually play out in real life? Like, how can I actually experience that in my everyday life?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can see how those lower levels of consciousness, the fear and the anger and the guilt, like, I can see how those show up in my life, but those higher levels seem a little bit more elusive.
Right, they do. And I think that's why it's so important to look at how these principles play out in different areas of our lives, so we can start to see how it's actually possible to experience those higher levels.
So, like, where should we start? Like, what area of life do you think is a good example?
Well, you mentioned earlier that you wanted to feel more confident at work, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, who doesn't want to feel more confident at work?
Right. So let's talk about how this power versus force dynamic shows up in the workplace.
Okay, I'm all ears because I feel like I'm constantly battling office politics and trying to get my ideas heard, and sometimes I just feel like I'm hitting a wall.
Yeah, I totally get that. And it's easy to feel powerless in those situations, especially when you're surrounded by people who seem to be operating from a place of force. Like they're trying to manipulate or control others to get what they want.
Ugh, yeah, exactly. And I don't want to be that person, but I also don't want to get walked all over.
Right. It's a tricky balance. And I think that's where this concept of power versus force comes in because Hawkins argues that true power doesn't come from trying to force our will on others. It comes from aligning ourselves with a higher level of consciousness.
So instead of trying to force my ideas on people, I should be focusing on raising my own level of consciousness.
Exactly. Because when you're operating from a place of power, you don't need to force anything. Your energy and your intentions will naturally attract the right people and the right opportunities.
Okay, that sounds good in theory, but how do I actually do that?
Yeah.
Like, how do I actually raise my level of consciousness at work?
Well, first, you have to become aware of where you're currently at on that map of consciousness.
Yeah.
Are you approaching your work from a place of fear or anger, or are you leading with courage and willingness?
Honestly, I think a lot of my actions at work are driven by fear. Fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of what other people think.
That's really common, especially in a competitive environment. But the key is to become aware of those fears and to start to shift your perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of letting fear drive your actions, what if you focused on cultivating courage and willingness?
So instead of being afraid of messing up, I should focus on being willing to learn and grow from my mistakes.
Exactly. It's a subtle shift, but it can have a huge impact on your energy and how you show up in the world.
Okay, so how do I actually do that? Like, how do I shift from fear to courage?
Well, one thing Hawkins talks about is the importance of authenticity. Are you trying to be someone you're not at work, or are you showing up as your true self?
That's a good question. I definitely feel pressure to conform to the company culture, even if it doesn't always feel genuine.
Right, and that's where things get tricky because if you're constantly trying to fit in and please others, you're essentially operating from a place of force. You're trying to force yourself into a mold that doesn't quite fit.
So how do I find that balance between being authentic and, not getting fired?
It's not always easy, but the key is to find ways to express your unique talents and perspectives within the context of your work. You know, Hawkins emphasizes the importance of aligning your actions with your core values.
So it's not just about climbing the corporate ladder, it's about finding work that feels meaningful and fulfilling.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the idea of attractor patterns. Remember how we talked about Walmart and its focus on customer service and employee well-being?
Yeah, that was surprising.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of Walmart as being particularly high consciousness.
Right, but Hawkins argues that their success stems from aligning with an attractor pattern that values those things, and it's not just about big companies. You can apply this principle to your own career as well.
So if I focus on cultivating courage, authenticity, and aligning my work with my values, I can create a positive attractor pattern that will draw in the right opportunities.
Exactly. It's about shifting your focus from what you lack to what you want to create. And remember, it's not just about you, it's about how your work contributes to the world.
So even if my job isn't saving the rainforest, I can still find ways to make a positive impact.
Absolutely. It's about bringing that higher level of consciousness into everything you do.
This is seriously making me rethink my whole approach to work. It's not just about working harder. It's about working smarter and more consciously.
Exactly. Now, speaking of consciousness, there's another fascinating concept Hawkins talks about that I think you'll find really interesting. Well, it's this idea of a database of consciousness.
A database of consciousness? What is that?
So basically, Hawkins describes it as this vast field of information and knowledge, like a universal library.
A universal library. So you're saying all the answers are out there somewhere just waiting for us to find them?
That's the theory. And it gets even wilder. He suggests that this database isn't bound by time or space.
Okay, whoa, hold on. So it's not just about accessing past knowledge. It's about accessing potential future insights.
Exactly.
Okay, now that's some next level stuff. But if that's true, how do we access this database? Like, is there a secret password or something?
Well, Hawkins believes that we access it through our intuition.
Our intuition.
Yeah, those flashes of insight that seem to come out of nowhere.
Like when you have a gut feeling about something and it turns out to be right?
Exactly. Or when you're struggling with a problem and then suddenly the solution just pops into your head.
You know what? I was working on this design project for weeks and I was totally stuck, and then I went for a walk and bam, the perfect solution just hit me like a bolt of lightning.
Maybe that was the database talking to me.
It's definitely possible. Hawkins suggests that the more we align with those higher levels of consciousness like love, joy, peace, the more easily we can tap into this universal knowledge.
So it's not just about thinking harder, it's about raising our vibration and opening ourselves up to a higher frequency.
Exactly. And that brings us to another point you highlighted in your notes, creativity.
Oh, yeah, creativity.
Hawkins believes that creativity is a powerful way to connect with this higher consciousness.
I've always loved creative activities, painting, writing, even just brainstorming new ideas. It definitely makes me feel more alive and more connected to something bigger than myself.
That makes sense. Hawkins argues that true creativity flows from those higher energy attractor patterns, joy, inspiration, that sense of flow. But when we create from a place of fear or self-doubt, we actually block that flow. So it's not just about having talent, it's about the energy we bring to the creative process.
Exactly. Think about it like this. When you're trying too hard to be perfect or to impress others, you're coming from a place of force.
Mm.
But when you let go of those expectations and just allow yourself to enjoy the process, you open yourself up to the power of pure creation.
It's like that saying, let go of the outcome and enjoy the journey.
Exactly. And that's a powerful lesson that we can apply to all areas of life, not just creativity.
Yeah.
It's about surrendering to the process, trusting our intuition, and allowing ourselves to be guided by something greater than ourselves.
Wow, this whole conversation has been a wild ride. I feel like I'm seeing the world in a completely new way.
Mm.
What's the biggest takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think Hawkins sums it up perfectly. He says,
All right.
we change the world not by what we say or do, but by what we become.
Powerful.
It's about recognizing the power of our own consciousness and choosing to align with love, compassion, and those higher frequencies.
And as we raise our own vibration, we contribute to a collective shift toward a more harmonious and enlightened world.
Exactly.
Beautifully said. And if you're listening and wanting to dive deeper into all of this mind-blowing stuff, we highly recommend checking out Power versus Force by David R. Hawkins. It's a book that can truly change your perspective on everything.
Absolutely. And remember, even small shifts in consciousness can have a ripple effect. So start by noticing your own thoughts and emotions. Are you operating from a place of fear or love, force, or power?
It's about making those conscious choices one moment at a time. And that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of exploration. Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep shining your light.